Hello everyone, welcome to part 5 of making Pong and Godot. In part 4, we added the scoring logic and game states. In this video, we'll be adding the UI. If you didn't watch the 4th video, don't worry, I'll include a download link in the description with the starting files for this one. I also added this font file here, and I'll include a download link to that as well. Let's get started. We'll start by making the UI for the score. Create a new scene, switch to 2D view, and we'll add a user interface node as the root. Double click on it and rename it to UI. Go to our file system, click on the scenes folder, and under the scenes folder, we'll create another one called UI. Now let's save our new scene in there, and we'll name it UI.scene. Since the scores are two numbers side by side at the top of the screen, we'll use a horizontal box container to control their layout. Press Ctrl A and we'll search for H box container, click add, double click, rename it scores, and we'll anchor this H box container to the top quarter of our screen. We can see how much space our screen takes up by looking at this little blue box here. To adjust the position of our H box, let's make sure it is selected here. Then in the inspector, we'll click on layout, and we don't have the option in the inspector to move our anchors yet. We need to click one of the anchors and drag it just a little bit. And now we see the options to adjust our anchors here. Expand anchor points and let's set right to 1 so it takes up the whole width of our screen. And bottom we'll set to 0.25 so it takes up the top quarter. Our anchors are now set how we want, but we can see that the box is a little bit off from where the anchors are. We can fix that by opening anchor offsets and making sure all the offsets are 0. Now that our container is positioned how we want, let's add 2 labels to display the text. Press Ctrl A, search label, and then we'll press Ctrl D to duplicate that label. Rename them to be player 1 score, and the second one to be player 2 score. For their text, enter 0 for both of them so we can see them on the screen. Now we can see them right there, very tiny on the far left. To center them, let's click on this little green box up here, then click on Shrink Center, and click on Expand. With this, we're telling the label to take up as much space as it can and to center itself. As a result, we're pushing the other element that does not have the expand flag over to the side. To make sure they're both centered, we need to also center the player 2 score and also give it the expand flag as well. Now both our scores are centered on the screen. Awesome. But the font is pretty tiny, making it very difficult to read. Let's configure our font size with a theme. If you don't know what a theme is, that's okay. Themes can be their own separate video. It's basically a way we can easily style UI elements in our game. Right click on our UI folder, go to Create New, Resource, and search for Theme. And we'll name it Main Theme. And we see it down here in the bottom of our editor. We want whatever styles we apply to the theme to apply to everything in our UI. To apply the theme to all elements in the scene, click on the UI node, go to Theme, click on where it says Empty, and we'll hit Quick Load, and we'll load the main theme. Click on Main Theme, and we see some options here to adjust the font. Let's make our font size to be 150, and that updates the font size for both of our scores, and they're a much better size. The font itself is still a bit bland though, as it's the default font we get with Godot. We can add our own custom font by going to the font that we imported. And again, if you don't have this in your project, you can go to the description of this video and download it there. Drag it into the default font, and our font updates. And it has a little bit more of a retro Pong type feel. Let's save this scene, go back into main, and to render our UI that we just created, we need to add a canvas layer node. Under the canvas layer node, we can go down to the UI scene and drag it as a child, and we have the UI in our main scene. Now run it, and we can see the score UI. And when we resize the window, we can see that the UI will resize with it. However, when a player scores, the text does not update. Let's update our new score UI when a player scores. Go back into the UI scene, make sure the root node is selected, and add a script, and we'll name it UI.gd and save it in the UI folder. Give it a class name so we can reference it in our main script and get autocomplete, say class name UI. And we need a reference to our scores container in our script so we can update our 2 labels. Rather than typing out on ready, what we can do is we can drag, hold down Control, and Godot will type out everything for us. We can remove the process function and define a new function, which we'll call update score. We'll have it taken which player scored as an integer and what is the score that we should set. So it'll be a void function. And to grab which label we should update, we're going to create a variable called player score text. This will be a label, and we'll set it to scores.getChildren, and we'll index it with the player that scored. What this does, it assumes that the player variable is either 0 or 1. And if the player integer is 0, it will update the player 1 score. And if it was 1, it will update the player 2 score. Once we have the label, we can update the text by calling player score text dot text, and we'll set it equal to the score, which we need to convert to a string. Save this, go into our main scene, which will open our main script, and we need to hold a reference to the UI node. So we'll do the same thing, hold down Control and release. Then an onScore. After a player scores, we'll call the update by doing UI.updateScore, and we'll pass in player.player1, player1 score. And do the same thing for player 2. UI.updateScore, player.player2, player2 score. We can use our player enum, since enum values are just integers under the hood, where player 1 will correspond to 0 and player 2 will correspond to 1. If we wanted, we could give them our own custom values and make it easier to see. So we can say player 1 equals 0 and player 2 equals 1. Before we run the scene, I'm going to update the winning threshold back to 10, run the game, and when a player scores, we can see that their score will update. Awesome. Let's add a main menu screen next. Switch back over to our 2D view, and we can add our main menu content to the same UI that our score text is in, and render the scoring text or the start menu based on what game state we are in. For the main menu, we'll display the game's title with a subtitle beneath it telling the players to press enter to start the game. Go and select the root node, Control A, and we'll use a vertical box container to lay out our titles. Rename it to Start Menu. Again, we'll use two labels here, so Control A label and duplicate it, and we can see that our vertical box will lay out our labels on top of each other. To place the start menu in the middle of the screen, all we need to do is go into our anchor presets and click on the center preset. And let's rename our labels. We'll call the first one title and the second one subtitle. For the title, the text will be Pong. And notice how this is automatically taking the font and the font size of the theme we already configured. This is part of what makes themes so powerful. We only need to set the style once and we can reuse it over and over again in our scene. And since the theme is applied to the root node, it will automatically apply to all children in the scene. Let's set the subtitle next. For the subtitle, we'll say press enter to start the game. And for our subtitle, the default font size is a little too big. We can see it goes outside the bounds of our screen space. We can override the font size of our main theme by scrolling down to theme overrides, clicking on font sizes, and we'll just make it about half of what the default font size is. Now that is much better. Make sure our text is centered, click on Pong, and we'll do horizontal alignment, shrink center. And for good measure, we'll do the same for our subtitle as well. I'll load our scene, and we can see the start menu. We can resize this too and see that it adjusts with our different screen sizes. But when we run the game, it stays on the screen, which is a little annoying to play with. Let's hide the start menu when the game starts, and hide the scoring text, and hide the ball when the start menu is shown. Go to the UI script, and hiding the scores is pretty simple. In the ready function, we'll just call scores.visible equals false. And for the ball, it's a similar thing. In the ready function here, we'll say ball.visible equals false as well. Load up the game, and we can see the ball and the scores are hidden at the start. Cool. Now we need to swap what is visible when the game begins. In the UI script, we'll define a function, say func on start game, make this a void. And to set the visibility of the start menu, we need a reference to it. So we'll click and drag and hold Control. In an on start game, what we want to do is set the scores to be visible, and we want the start menu to be invisible. We'll say visible equals false. Then go into our main script, scroll down to physics process, And if game state equals game states.start and we start the game, we serve the ball and we'll set ball.visible to be true. And we'll call UI.onStartGame. Run our game. And when we press enter, the start menu is hidden and the scores and the ball are displayed. Awesome. There's one final menu we need to add for when the game is over. The game over menu will be almost the same layout as the start menu. We'll have the title be set to game over and we'll say who won, and then we'll have a message below saying press R to restart the game. So we can reuse our title and subtitle, and we'll render the third label based on if it's the start menu or the game over menu. We can give start menu a more generic name. Maybe we'll call it something like message menu. And we can duplicate the subtitle to get our third label. For the third label, we'll call it restart game message. And let's update our labels to display an example game over menu, just so we know it looks good. Say game over, and then this subtitle will say player 1 wins. In the restart game message, we'll say press R to restart the game. For the third label here, we can make the font size even smaller. Go back into theme overrides, font sizes, and we'll make it something like 50. Now go into our code, UI script, and we need to update the reference to the start menu. We'll need to make this message menu. Rename the variable as well to make it more descriptive. Message menu. Down here, we'll change this to message menu 2. And we also need a reference to the restart game message so we can update its visibility. And the ready function, make sure restart game message.visible is set to false. Then make a function called funcOnGameOver. This will control the UI when the game ends. When that happens, we'll leave the scores as visible, but we'll also set the message menu to be visible too. Visible equals true. And we also want the restart game message to be visible too. And we also need to update the text for our title and our subtitle nodes. So I'll grab a reference to those as well and grab subtitle. We'll say title.text equals game over. Then our subtitle text will be based off whichever player won. That is already being determined in our main script. So for this function, we'll let the main script pass in the message that we should display. So we'll call it subtitle message, say string, and then set subtitle.text equals to subtitle message. Then to set the restart game message through code, we'll say restart game message.text equals press R to restart the game. And in the ready function, let's also set up our start menu properly too. I'll copy all that. We don't need the restart game message, but we'll set title.text equals to Pong and the subtitle message equal to press enter to start the game. In main, scroll down to set game over, and rather than printing out which player won, we'll call UI.onGameOver, and the subtitle message will be player 1 wins. Otherwise, the message will be player 2 wins. Player 2. Let's also stop printing out when player scores just to clean up the code a little bit. And so we can see that the game over menu works properly, let's lower the scoring threshold once again, run the scene, press enter to start the game, and when a player wins, we show the game over menu. Awesome. Our game is almost fully complete. We just need to add audio to give it some extra juice, which we'll do in the next video. And that should do it for this one. The question for the day is, what is your favorite video game UI? Mine is Dead Space because I love how seamlessly it is integrated with the game world. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.